Hey, Tommy. Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Reed. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. And I will say is we are live, but I realized that their YouTube threw into my wrong chat or
Uh-oh.
on the wrong stream. So we are live, but the label is needs to be updated. So I will do that once we get started. But
No
otherwise, I'm
worries.
excited to have you on and also to talk about some exciting things related to some metrics measurements. So I think given that, we'll spend a little extra time actually talking about what we will go into today. And then once I hand it off to you, I will make sure to also update the title and the abstract for people. But Tommy's
Well,
going to be my
yeah.
guest this week. There's another guest that's currently on the thumbnail, but we'll get that fixed here momentarily. I do see that we have a few people already in the chat. And this is your third time coming back on?
Yeah, this is the third time. So I'm getting close to that SNL. I get a
Yeah.
jacket. So I think after hosts on SNL get on 5 times, they get a special jacket. So we'll
Right?
see
Yeah,
what
yeah,
happens.
yeah.
Yeah. So I feel honored. Feel honored
You
to
can
be
be up there
asked.
with Steve Martin and a lot of those other fivers.
Steve Martin, Alec Baldwin. I think John Goodman's another one. Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
those. Hey, if I'm in the same breath as Alec Baldwin and Steve Martin, I feel pretty good.
That would be pretty funny if we could end up like if I actually created some specific Havens Consulting like Letterman jackets for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I think this time it's going to be a more conversational chat around a general framework on how it's in a way to measure success, right?
Yeah.
And I know you've used topics around pressure points. I use pain points.
Yeah.
But I think to get started and also to give me a chance to just update the title, what would you say is give me like a little bit of a background on yourself for the audience members who aren't familiar with you. Also, maybe to help promote your podcast as well that you do with Mike and Seth. And let's
Any
get
chance
started
I
from
get.
there.
Yeah. So any
Yes.
chance I get to promote the podcast. So for everyone watching, my name's Tommy Puglia. I'm a Power BI consultant and kind of focus on data culture, data from adoption, governance, and training. So I'm also honored to be a 5-time Microsoft MVP and a Microsoft certified trainer. Been in the space since a Power BI designer, and I feel like I made all the mistakes, which is why I really enjoy the consulting side of it. So others don't have to. I've been the analyst. I've been the director of BI. I worked on an enterprise just starting from Excel to go to Power BI. I worked on ones migrating from Tableau over, and those going from Power BI looking to take the next step, and been in the inside. And then I kind of took the jump to be the consultant just because I love the different situations, and people always ask what I do, and they're like, well, what industry do you focus in? And I'm like, any industry with a dilemma. And that's really what we do, and that's what I love about it. It's industry agnostic in terms of people have problems, they're trying to solve something. It's people, process, and technology. I'm also lucky enough to talk to Mike, Carlo, and Seth Bauer on a twice a week basis. I don't know if they're as lucky as I am, because they have to talk to me. But we have a podcast out there called the Explicit Measures Podcast. We're 260 in now, and we call it the water cooler conversations. I love the community and how to do things, but I think we realized, Mike and Seth and I realized that there's a lot of gray area in what we do. Where yes, a bar chart is nice, but we've had conversations around, is there such thing as a perfect report? We just had a conversation on the roles in Fabric and what do they mean, because if you actually look at the roles, not really that detailed. It's really, you're either an admin or you're a viewer in terms of the permissions you get. So what does that mean for an organization?
Yeah.
And so we kind of run the gamut of from data visualization to storytelling, and really talk about the real world. What does this actually mean in reality? And we have some great conversations. You can find us on PowerBI.tips.
And with that, I'm also I just want to mention that I like Kurt's recent little LinkedIn mini post on the fact that Fabric has kind of been overwhelming for a lot of people, and in general, if your company doesn't have things that are obviously broken, you don't need to go learn all these new things yet. And I think the roles is the same thing. It's like there's the roles do help to filter what can be created for people who don't need to see everything, but it's kind of a scary amount of new stuff. It's like, oh my God, like, do I have to go spend 2 weeks to learn all this stuff now? So everything that exists will continue to exist. There's just new things, and the new things can be learned at some point, but they don't have to be learned today.
Well, I think every consultant, I'm not, I don't want to speak for every consultant out there, but I think when that dropped in May, I think every consultant had a mini heart attack or a mini stroke going, oh, I guess I also have to be an expert as a data scientist, data engineer, and I also have to learn real-time events now and get paid for that. So there was that moment, and I think for organizations too. But yeah, there's a big point here too. You don't have to become an expert in everything. Just because Fabric's out there doesn't mean that the entire organization is transferring all of their engineering, all of their ETL over to Fabric. That being said, this goes back to the bit of a gray area we don't have to get into now on, I think our roles are evolving too. I don't think you can survive by also just saying, I know data modeling.
I mean, it's funny enough that you said that as I'm intimidated even to a degree, and just like, oh my God, like there's where do I take my career path? Because there's breadth and then there's depth. Someone posted this picture quite a few years ago, and it was a quadrant of like modeling, like Azure and all these other stuff, and like, all right, there's 100 cubes, 100 little bar sections that can be filled in, but you in the time that you have in your career, you only get like 15 cubes basically to fill out knowledge. Would you go across? Do you go down? And where is your focus on? Because you can't fill out the entire grid. Nobody has enough time for that. But to that degree, I think that you either need to hyper specialize on a particular topic to become. I'm not going to be your end-to-end stack, but I'm going to be that. I'm going to be the knife that's a surgical knife applied to something when it needs to be, like the Marco to DAX or something like that. Maybe not to that level, but to that concept. Or you need to have a team. And like I'm noodling on the idea of even having at some point partnering up with someone maybe and starting a small consultancy, just because I think to truly be an end-to-end stack in this ecosystem, you need at least a couple of people, because one person there's too much information for one person to have the knowledge to do everything well themselves. They could maybe get by, but you can't have the expert DBA and the data engineer and the data scientist and the data analyst and everything in between most of the time in one person's brain. That needs to be at least a few people.
1,000%. And then we were just talking about this before, and add on where AI is going to fit into this, which is definitely going to, you may be able to know all this, but good luck having a relationship, a friendship, or community at all. So there is a lot. To me, I would say that, like if someone is struggling with that, one, definitely look at Kurt's article. But I think at the end of the day is, how well are you? And I think this goes honestly with way technology is going and our ability to learn. How competent are you at solving problems or knowing how to find a solution to a problem? Because there's no intelligence at this point right now where you know everything by heart, but your ability to basically take all the information in, box it up and say what fits for these people, where are they at? Because not one solution is always going to be the right for everyone.
Exactly. Completely agree. Now, just finished updating everything. As a fun little factoid for people on YouTube, basically what you do is if you schedule a series of streams, they all actually use the same key for me, but it automatically goes to the most recent one. And I realized that next week's stream, which is Gregor Bruner's and the new updates for Measure Killer, both of you are scheduled at the same time, and it automatically popped into his rather than yours. So I basically swapped the titles around. I think people who are in this at least know from the LinkedIn post that this was the stream today, but it broadcast to the wrong stream that was cached in YouTube. But
I'm happy to take
on the stream that we're on is right. Yeah.
I'm happy to take a little Measure Killer juice from there, so I'll make sure send a bottle of wine in case I get some of his
next
viewers.
Week. Yeah. Well, and also it's just as a 5-second mention, awesome tool. Excited to hear some of the new stuff from next week. But I use it with all of my clients' stuff. It is, when you can one click get a result of unused measures and columns, super cool stuff. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about like the conversations that you go into with clients on this. So this for people tuning in, this stream will be conversational. We do have some slides as well, maybe to help give placeholders for
Yeah.
topics we're going into, but I want this to be conversational with the audience and us being able to chat with you. So feel free to drop in questions in there. But I think Toby is going to go into a lot of the good soft skills that go into. It's not just building a report, but it's the
Yeah.
whys. Like what are the what are the values that we can extract out of it, and how can we have a conversation to ensure that whatever is being delivered with it is going to maximize the value that's being given by any of the data sets and reports that you're essentially building out for a client. So where would you like to start on that conversation?
So yeah, why don't we jump into the slides here, and we'll kind of go in through, I think, where a lot of this has actually come from. So we're calling this a measurement framework, and this is something that I've been providing to clients and organizations, but it's honestly, this is a framework for anyone who's in the BI space, whether organization, department, or a BI team. And the idea here is, how are we measuring things? And let's start with the problem. And I think it's always good to start with, where does it actually begin? What are the common problems that I think that we deal with when it comes to a good report? And this is something that's always fascinated me on, even if I have all the skills in BI, and you and I both, and a lot of people have the skills to build a good model and good visualizations, but I always go back to, like, when did I struggle on building a report? Why did I struggle on building a report? Was it the lack of data? Probably not. The lack of the need? No, of course there was some type of need, but it goes to me on the targets. And I want to make sure we really talk about what a target is, because we usually think of the target in terms of, oh, well, it's the business clear targets that were set from the organization. So let's talk briefly about the target. Is that the top down set by the business, where the business says, here's our objectives, every department has a clear KPI or target? Not necessarily. It doesn't happen as much as you would think. Is that for every team? Is it set in stone, approved by lawyers, and contract written out? Usually not. And I think this idea of, oh, well, this team or this organization or this client doesn't have a target, so therefore we can't do anything, right? Because we don't want to introduce a target that they don't have, because no one's bonused on that. That's the wrong way of thinking about this. And I want to take a step back here and talk about, before we even talk about measuring and the right way to measure, I want to ask you, Reed, in terms of, how much do you see this too, where there's the lack of clear targets, not necessarily set by the business, but for a scoping, for a report, for a solution, or for a problem that they have? Like, let's first start with, what's your definition of a target?
I mean, it's the question that's trying to be answered. So like the ignoring the data, ignoring anything else, like what is a question you have about your business? Like what to you is a measurement of success? So if you, are you trying to make something better? Are you trying to make sure things aren't getting worse? Like, but what is a measurement of a thing that you need to monitor? Like, what do you want to be notified of when something happens? Those, those start from the targets, and then you can go, all right, well, what data provides that, and then how do we visualize that? But it's from a very, very, very high level, just like plain English. What are you asking about your business? And and how is that measurement of success determined?
And how often too, in an unhealthy data culture, do you find what I call, like, the siloed, or they keep it around the chest, like, we don't want to give you our targets because we don't want people to see this in a report. Well, they're not necessarily clear by the business. We don't want people to get the wrong idea. I hear this a ton more than I would like to. I've heard this, like I said, both when I worked internally, and I hear this now. What are the common things that you hear around this, Reed?
So, I mean, in terms of just the inability to kind of answer those questions, or
that, yeah.
Yeah, I know, a lot of people just have a hard time actually, like, well, I just know I want to look at sales. Like, sure, but like,
right.
What's a measurement of success? Is that compared to prior month? Do you have a target? Do you want to create a target? If we're creating a target, how do we determine that? Is that versus last year? Is like, what is an accurate measurement to help you figure out when you want to be notified? Because and I also just I like to even start with using metrics and goals in Power BI. It's like, no, before we even build the report, I want us to start from thinking about, what are the things that we want to be notified via Teams or email when a trigger occurs, when it tells us to go look at the report. You shouldn't have to look at this every day. What should be things that help you determine when you should actually look at the data when something has changed for your organization, day to day, week to week, or month to month. Otherwise, you get that rock scenario. If somebody just says, "Give me a rock," okay, here's a rock. Well, I don't want that rock. Well, what rock do you want? I don't really know, but like, it's not this one. Give me another rock. And unless you continue to ask questions to figure out, what color, what size, what shape it needs to be, and help them figure that, they're just, it's going to constantly be a choice paralysis of, well, it's not that. I don't know what it will be, but like you just keep bringing them to me, and you're stuck perpetually just providing more and more rocks.
I think you said the number one area or the number one reply when it comes to the lack of targets is because for usually the individual or the team, there's a very unclear or gray area of like, well, I don't know what, like, I know we want to look at our call rate, but I don't know what's bad or good. Like, I don't know, because I don't, one, there's a conservative effort where if I give you the wrong number, then everyone's going to be targeted on something that I may not have confidence in, where it's like, maybe 7, like, for example, like maybe 7's good, but I don't know. Like, and if you're making our team based on that, now we're all based on something we don't believe in, or we have no context. I have no context. And that's the number one thing that I find. And I think across the board, regardless if you're a consultant or you work on a BI team, that you find work in departments, like, I don't have context on, we can look at year over year, that's fine, but a lot of things have changed too. So I don't know what's clear, especially when you're dealing with volume. So this is where I'm introducing, or I want to introduce, what's called the measurement framework. And the measurement framework is really going to be this idea of how do we establish what we'll call those pressure points or thresholds, and also beginning to measure what matters in building a healthy data culture. I want to start first on what's not, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. This is not, we're measuring something completely different. This doesn't mean, oh, I know that you always look at sales, that's your number, but no, we're going to take something completely different. This is not because there's a lack of data. Usually it's the other way around. And it doesn't change the objectives. If your organization already has clear objectives that you're running towards, that is still going to be primary. However, what the measurement framework is really built around is, again, creating thresholds or establishing what we're going to call pressure points. This is huge in a lot of organizations where they may not be willing to say we're going to give or provide a target that everyone's going to be based on, because, again, that becomes now everyone's measurement, which, again, may not be necessarily right. So, but what we can do from either one single report or for a business in general is provide a way to say, okay, where are the areas where we don't want to be, or where do we really want to be? How do we establish that and at least group that context? So pressure points, another way of saying it, what keeps you up at night? And we're going to start from those extremes in case of, we can say this from what we do with training, right? Where, how do I know my training was good? Well, what would you say, Reed, is if you were doing training and you had a feedback form and what would be a quality number of people who said they would recommend this people to, like a quality rate that they would recommend this training to someone else?
Now, I mean, there's a difference between obviously raw and ratio. I mean, if 15 people recommended it out of 100, probably not particularly good. 15 out of 20.
Right.
So, like, is this something where but this is also, I think, there's a lot of important clarifications on this, and it depends answer. So, am I giving a Microsoft Forms survey and like seeing how many people check the box of recommending, or is this just me, like, if I just had a marquee of people in the room and I just asked every one of them, let's say it
was a Microsoft Forms survey, you had a feedback form after training.
Okay, because one, you already axe half of the group, because a lot of people will not fill out the post training surveys that in general. I would say a measurement of success is of whatever percentage fills it out. Probably for me, 60 to 80% at least would recommend it. I usually get pretty good reviews, but again, if I do a training of 20, I might only get 6 to 10 people who fill it out. It's a lot of people just don't take the time, even if you have the simplest Microsoft form designed, which is the best survey taker out there. It's so easy to make. But yeah, I'd say 60 to 80% of the people who attended, as long as they're like, yes, would take again, essentially, or would recommend this to a
Yeah.
friend. The other outliers are usually the people who are either uh, so introductory that like I've never touched Excel. This just blew me. It was too much information. And then you have that advanced user who's used it for 10 years and like was way too kindergarten and basic. But those are normally the outliers who don't like a particular
Right.
training is because it's too simple or too advanced or too simple.
Right. And the point of me asking is not to get the right answer, but I think to demonstrate here for something that would be so critical for us, because I asked the same question to myself, like, what would be an acceptable number, right? It's not clear cut. And there's really not a universal answer to that. Like in different industries, you're going to get a different number. And even for us too, in our training, if I'm doing a dashboard in a day, I'm probably going to expect something different. The point being, what would keep you up at night? Well, definitely a 0%, right? And kind of building up from there, really the pressure point is the conflict of a decision that I would have to make. And I'll do the example for myself rather than putting you on the spot. If I were to get a 30% satisfaction rate, I'm going to have to make a decision whether I'm either continue training or going to change how I do my training. And I'm going to work myself up from there. And this is, well, I don't want to get too ahead of it, but this is part of the calibration where what I would do for myself is continue to work myself up to basically building some confidence in whatever the number I would establish. And I do this for my training. I do this for other feedback that I get from my consulting gig where do I find something acceptable? Well, where's that point where I, in a sense, can sleep at night? And that's the fun way of saying it. But we're going to actually talk about this more. Really, a pressure point is the conflict of where a decision needs to be made, regardless of the type of number that you're looking at. Whether it's volume, it does work. I would say going through all of this, it does work better when we're dealing with rates. But that being said, if I'm looking at sales, if I'm looking at availability rate, if I'm looking at satisfaction rate, there's always going to be some threshold of what's acceptable or what's tolerable. And those pressure points are important because they start with some main areas where what organizations, teams, or an individual is going to ask themselves, well, whatever this number is and whatever metric you're looking at, we can't continue on this. Like if you were to continue at this number, you're not going to be successful. Take this at the number of McDonald's burgers are getting are purchased, or again to a satisfaction rating from training. Or this is positive. There's both sides of the coin here. We'll focus a bit on the negative because that does tend to stick out. Mm-hmm. However, that being said, there are always going to be the upper and the lower echelon of what's acceptable, what's tolerable. The fun ones that I like to say that when I've done this workshop with people, someone literally said, I know who I need to yell at now. And to me, that's like the golden, that is the sweet spot that I'm going for, where there's the two areas of like, who am I going to yell at and who am I buying a cake for? Who am I promoting? I like to think of these two areas of whatever metric that, and you can't do this for really any metric of, who's getting promoted, who needs additional training, so to speak. But the idea here is any pressure point, positive or negative, or let me rephrase that. Any metric that we're looking at from an organization or any metric you have for yourself has an upper and lower area, an area that causes celebration, an area that causes despair. Obviously, I'm talking extremes here, but the idea here is there's going to be that threshold of what's going to keep you up at night, what's going to cause you to make a decision, really cause you to make decisions. I love sayings, but I do hate cliches and, like, oh, we're doing data-driven decisions. Well, let's put that to the test. So
it's one like, you like pressure points. I also use the word pain point, but it's
pain points is the same.
It's what causes you the most pain or distress, or
right.
But gaps, pain, pressure, all of those I think are all synonyms for something addressing like what are the problems that we can identify.
Right. Mm-hmm. And the next question you usually get is, okay, that's fine, this is great, but then how do you do it, right? It's one thing to say every metric has pressure points or pain points or those areas, but how can you actually get a team to do that accurately or establish that? Just going back to the training one, which, by the way, you could have not given me a better answer with from the training satisfaction rate, because we'll use that. We'll ride that throughout this this call. But the idea there is, fine, okay, but how do we then have some confidence in whatever that number is? If it's 60%, well, if we're going to say it's 60, then we're going to rely on that. But are we confident in that? Is that something I want to rely on? And when you talk to clients or you talk to stakeholders, if you're going to provide them a number, you want to make sure that they're on board with that too, and they are trusting that number too. So this is actually from a great book, and I do want to mention that the inspiration for this framework is coming from this book called How to Measure Anything by Doug Hubbard, who's actually based in Chicago, and I got to meet with.
That's awesome.
And yeah, he does a lot of kind of the same framework here for like security, IT, the government and organizations. And the idea really is you can measure anything. He was talking from a framework where there was a lot of organizations thought there wasn't enough data to begin to measure something, and he completely debunked that. We're living in a world now where, again, there's more than enough data. There's data for everything.
Yeah.
But again, are we measuring it the right way? And are we measuring the right things? And are we measuring it the right way? That's our problem now. Not that do we have it. So the idea that the workshop is, in order to get someone to establish their own or team's pressure points, we have to calibrate them. We have to calibrate them to have confidence. And this is confidence intervals. So you may not necessarily know your target, or you may not know those pressure points, but we're going to calibrate you or a team to know what hurts or to know what feels good, so to speak. And that's what we're calling our thresholds. Any metric that we're working on, if you get a client that says, I want to see sales, well, let's establish those thresholds for the sales. Obviously, we're establishing this based on a time frame, but there's going to be areas of what hurts, what doesn't, what's great, where do we need to change. And in order to do that, we're going to basically work our way back up. So those thresholds, this type of visual, and this is our common Van Arsdale dashboard in a day data, looking at market share, right? This is very different than looking at that with a simple item here. I cannot tell you, and I know you know this because you're the master of data visualization. I love all the stuff that you do. And just by changing this visual, for those who do not utilize some of the conditional formatting and some of the additional features in visuals, I cannot stress this enough how much that can change the scope and the quality of a report. And I know you can talk to this too, but these two visuals are exactly the same. The only thing I've added here is simply a constant line. These constant lines have saved my reports.
Something as just a threshold marker, right?
Just simply as a threshold marker, exactly. But in order to get this right, what I'm going to do with you now is we're going to actually do a quick workshop based on just kind of how this workshop based. Because what I want to do is we're going to establish your idea of how well you know, how well do you trust yourself, so to speak. So imagine we had a spinning wheel, and I know we talked about this a little earlier, but now we have the visual. I'm going to give you a question, and I'm going to ask you how confident you are. If you get the question right, I'll give you $100. Now, you also have the option here, Reed, you can spin the wheel, and if you get in the blue area, I'll also give you $100. Depending, you can choose which one you want. Either you can answer the question, and I'll even give you the question in advance, or you can spin the wheel and try to get in the blue. So let's ask the question, and I'm going to ask you, who has the most World Series titles in baseball?
That would be a bit of a shot in the dark for me, so probably not particularly confident.
Okay,
so Yankees.
Let's change it. Let's say the Yankees. So, how confident do you think you are in that?
Like only 40-50%.
Okay,
it's mostly a guess, but like.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's change it up. Why don't we do? Why don't we do this? Who has the number one sales of Ford motor cars, or what's the number one Ford car that's been sold?
I mean, in terms of actual scale, I would imagine it'd be like the Ford Taurus or something, because that was a fleet vehicle.
So where's your confidence there, you think?
Like 70%.
All right. So let's do one more, and this should be a pretty easy one. Let's say, can you give me the third president of the United States?
Washington. No, actually, I can't.
Okay.
I wouldn't be able to do the third one.
Okay. All right. How about this? Give me a 20-year range when the second president happened.
Oh, you
when
mean
the years?
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay. I mean, you have 7, so 20-year range for that. I mean, you just go from 1776 and add 20 then.
Oh, I think we had a few things. Or you could be sure. So, where's your confidence there? Well, give me where your confidence number.
I'll go for 90% for that one.
So, you're gonna go straight 90 too. So you're gonna make it difficult for me. So, okay. So let's ask this. Would you rather
85%?
Okay. So what would you rather do if I said you're gonna answer that and I'm gonna give you the number? Would you rather answer that question or do you want to spin the wheel?
And spinning the wheel just means I have to land in the blue.
You just have to land in the blue.
I mean, statistically, I probably, have a better chance at the blue.
So right away, we know if you said, in the case that you said you were 95% confident, you really weren't.
Yeah.
Right. So in this example that we're doing, all we're doing is just trying to establish a 90% confidence interval for you, regardless of how you evaluate whatever question. The question doesn't matter. And I want to establish that regardless if I said, okay, who landed on the moon first or whatever the range is. The idea is if you said, Tommy, I know the question, I'm really like 99% confident. I know the third president, but I said, but I rather spin the wheel, then you're not 90%. You're less than 90% based on simple confidence intervals. My goal for you with this threshold, and I think this is where a lot of people get this wrong, is they're like, oh no, I don't know our exact threshold, and we don't. And this is the common first reply when we try to do this exercise. For our sales number, well, we don't have an exact number. I don't need an exact threshold. I don't need an exact threshold, and I want to reiterate that you don't need to know if your sales number is 5% less, and if you don't get that right, you're wrong. Can I get you at 90% confidence in your threshold of what's acceptable? If I can do that, we can build a report that's something that you're going to look at every day or at least every week. So my goal is to, basically on this workshop, this is just the first of many exercises, is to establish how you evaluate a question or you evaluate something that may not be known, and to try to get you to a point where you can calibrate yourself, where you can evaluate your things. So now when we're actually doing metrics for our organization, when I'm doing metrics for my department or my goal, now when I ask you that question about the training, we begin to work towards, you know what? I don't know what's acceptable. And even for myself, if I had a feedback survey, the NPS, I would say like 90%, I don't want under 70%. And I would rather do that than spin the wheel, so to speak, because I would be more confident in things being above that than below. But the idea is to calibrate someone, because in most things that we do, we want the number to be exactly right. I want to see how many sales I have. When it comes to thresholds, when it comes to the measurement framework and pressure points, I don't want to get to 0 or 100%. We don't need to. And this is an important distinction here.
All right. There's a phrase that perfect is the enemy of good.
1,000%.
I remember like 10 years ago when I first started working with Microsoft for a company that did vending for them, and I was basically building Excel reports that was trying to determine clients and people who were qualified to get certain credits for extra seats at, back when Office 365 was first coming out and all that. And I just remember that I think it was a kind of a fuzzy qualification on who matched and whatnot. And I just remember in terms of how much money was available to apply based on the number of available and all this. And like, I think there was a margin of error of, there was billions of dollars worth of revenue, and there was a couple million off or something here and there. Like overall, like this is less than 0.01% off. That's fine. Like, wait, like it's okay to be a few $millions off in a margin of error. Like the scale of that, the first time I'd ever worked with a company that large, it kind of blew my mind. I'm like, oh, it's a few million. That's fine. It's not a big deal. We're still getting most of our customers, and it's just kind of like doesn't it have to be perfect? Well, no, it's close enough. We're getting 99.9% of the audience we want to hit. Why spend, dozens of hours to get that extra 0.1%? It's a diminishing return.
Right.
But perfect is the enemy of good. Sometimes the data doesn't actually have to be completely perfect. It needs to be good enough.
Yeah, and like I said, obviously try to get your metrics accurate as possible. But
Of course,
again,
yeah.
this is the next level of the thresholds of that. Again, our high and low of what's acceptable that everyone also thinks needs to be 100%, and they don't. They just really, at the end of the day, and I do not want to call it subjective, but that being said, there is a level here of a 90% confidence on what's acceptable. Which, yeah, for different organizations, there's probably going to be different levels. But the idea here is not so much on the exact number, but on what causes that organization to have strain or have benefits. And that's what we're going for. And you're going to find you can have the same number. I can deal with 25 call centers, and each of those call centers may have the same metrics, universal metrics they're looking at, but their acceptable rate that they're willing to live with is going to be different. And each of those are what they're going to live by. That becomes what they look at, even though that's not an exact. And you find this with every single metric and I'm constantly astounded by this. So the trust is really in really five main questions in terms of how do we know we have trust? Is this acceptable? Is if we're 5% off the sales, if I have 5% number of widgets created, is that acceptable to me, to my team, and to my boss? Can we manage this? What's tolerable? So how much can we stretch this? And again, both positive and negative. And I love the question, like, what is good? Because it's a bit philosophical, but at the same time, truly, your company may establish we want 10% year over year, but that's a high level number for, that might not be for a particular team. Email sends. What is good? How do we know what good is? And can we?
I mean, post-COVID, good can just be our company only shrinks by 5% this year instead of 10. Right. So it could still be a loss, but it's like it's a controlled loss,
Exactly.
So, yeah, but it is a threshold that you've set a goalpost. That goalpost could be up, that goalpost could be down, but it's still a goalpost of something. Right. Comparative value at the end of the day, usually.
That's a very strong point, because the last question that usually helps people the most is if this number were to continue, and I let them fill in the blank. Where if you're a 5% down, it's like, if we're to continue that, well, that's okay. Like you said, if we're only 5%, great. Okay, then this is our bottom. We're going to track everything off this. Why does this help from BI? And what we found is all the reports that we build are geared towards the thresholds and are geared towards the pressure points. Not only because we've been talking a lot about the organizations and the soft skills, right? This directly translates into every report and how it's built. And I cannot understate this from both a personal and then from the client feedback that we've got. The reports that are built off of this, because now they're geared towards everything's focused on, are we below, is your team, are the users, is the product below that certain threshold? It makes it, one, a heck of a lot easier to build a report, but two, that report becomes very impactful because you have your context. Context is everything in a report. It's not just the numbers. Yeah, you need a good data model. Hopefully you know some DAX, but the context is everything. How you build your report, what visuals show up. It's a clear direction for BI. It's a clear direction to what someone wants to look at. If they trust it, if they have at least what we found, 90% confidence in those thresholds, this is what they focus on. And this becomes, in a sense, I don't want to say the new Bible for them, but it very much becomes their new context as well on what they're focusing on, rather than a random volume number that they were just tasked to build. So just a few things in distributing it, and then we'll continue the conversation. But how do we distribute the measurement framework? There's 3 areas. They don't necessarily all happen at the same time. Measurement framework gets distributed through data culture. If you already have objective and key results, or the OKR framework, and top down. So ideally, your organization, your team already has some key numbers that you're looking at. It's like, well, we're trying to get to this at the end of the quarter. That's the ideal framework, which makes it a lot easier to really roll out your the measurement framework. Departments and teams, it is leadership led. So you're working with a manager or a VP on that department who understands those metrics. There's the people who are most intimate with it. And there's always redefining these goals. Just the beautiful thing about this too is these fluctuate. So if we set up our satisfaction rating, well, in 2 months, 3 months, we're going to review this and say, okay, has this worked out or not? Okay, now let's re-ramp this. Let's change our targets based on what we know. And again, with BI teams, it's really working with users, and it's again how we build the visuals. And it really comes down to how are we actually reporting. There is reporting for finance, there's reporting for where we're at, and there's again reporting for actual decision making. So yeah, this is the measurement framework. This is really what's been rolled out for a lot of my clients. But again, also what I've seen is it's the only success that I'm living by right now in terms of if I'm working with a client, we're building out this measurement framework for them. So that's what I got there. I would love to see what questions either is in the chat or what you got.
Yeah, so I think the implementing this, what's a case study you have of one of the times where there has been the most resistance that you've found to this, or just maybe not resistance necessarily, because I think by the time they're bringing you in for this, they're probably not resisting to us, but someone who had the hardest time with this adoption and why?
Old numbers. It's like old money. Where in but
Paginated reports.
Like, no, not that old. But it's the numbers. Well, we've always looked at the numbers this way, and that's what I commonly get. I'll give a good example. I had one project where all the numbers they looked at were all volume based, even though it didn't make sense to look at it that way, because in the scope of things, we always knew the volume was going to be in this certain range. And it was an Excel sheet they wanted to convert to Power BI, which is always the problem. Regardless, you had about 25 data points per day on this that they were like, we've always looked at it this way. And the conversation was, well, first, the first question you and I asked is why, but it really goes into what if, you're more concerned about the high level, this divided by this, so to speak, the rate here. But it's like leadership wants this because they've always had this, and this is their own context. Even though there was nothing from our point of view that they could take a look at or they could really make a decision off of, this was their index that they've looked at for years. So why would they change that? And usually, too, the reply or the struggle is, well, again, you're introducing something that is not from the organization. This is not a target from the organization. It's like, again, that's not the point here. So it's trying to communicate to them that just because we're introducing these thresholds, that's not something someone's bonused on.
Well, and that can be scary for a lot of people too, because the moment you define a target, you are now, there's accountability if you are below that.
1,000%.
Yeah, so that can also be very, it's like, people can be resistant of this, like, no, because like I'm doing fine in my job, like it's good enough, but I don't want to have to now have this like thing that I have to worry about being under and getting fired for or something like that.
Don't you dare tell me what failure is, and don't you dare put it in a report. No, and that's data culture too, Reed. I mean, that is 1,000% data culture in terms of what people are engaged on, where they're like, don't show me if my success rate was below this, and now everyone can see it. It's like the goal is not to show that someone's failing. The goal is to say, like, could you live with that? Do you want to live with that? And you're putting your numbers out there. There's a little feeling of being naked out there. But for organizations, rather than looking at the end of the year to say, oh wow, we missed our target by X, Y, and Z, or why did we perform so poorly? The goal is to get ahead of that.
I completely agree, and I think there's a degree of also having to speak their language as well. Every company has their own vernacular or way that they speak to ideas or topics, and I think that also plays a lot into communication with the team on setting up some of this framework for sure.
100%.
Nothing in the chat at the moment for questions, just a few comments, but I think like For some of the implementations that you've done of this, what are some of the tools that you use within Power BI to help also for this? Like I briefly mentioned metrics. Do you
Mhm.
use metrics regularly to help with that? Are there any other ways that besides just reports that that you use as part of like a suite of tools to not only monitor but enforce like
Yeah.
metrics and everything else in terms of some of the measurement frameworks?
Scorecards, they've been important. They haven't been as much as I love scorecards, and I've been on that bandwagon for a long time. They haven't been like the critical starting point usually
Hmm.
for us. Honestly, honestly, it really has been utilizing those features in Power BI, such as the constant line or creating the conditional formatting, just to highlight those things. Because again, people are very visual driven. The scorecards usually come as an after effect. They have not been the starting point, which I've actually found curious.
Yep. I do agree that analytics lines go a long way into helping identify that, and conditional formatting everywhere, just throwing it into the report, either being
Yeah,
titles, colors, or anything else to call out indicators. But I think there's definitely a mixture of both the art and the science that goes into the reporting.
yeah.
Once these conversations and these ideas have been established, but I do think that this hits on the fact that it's if you just build a report to spec without any further conversations on the whys behind what's driving it and the story that it's trying to tell, you're probably not going to deliver a particularly good report,
And
especially to a
yeah.
client.
And that's a problem I've had or I have a problem with where a lot of organizations view the BI team as kind of like their service, not so much experts.
Hmm.
And where they're like, no, just build the report. Don't ask me questions on what
Yep.
my numbers are. And because again, that part of the silo too. But I I think this is going to evolve where BI is going to be seen more as consultants, even in house. But I've seen the biggest pushback is I've asked you to build a report. I did not ask you to build thresholds, and even getting complaints from there too. And I remember I try when I was a youngin, so to speak. There were ways that I tried to bring this out, and I was a lowly data analyst,
Hmm.
and one of the ones was like, can you just build us a sales report for the quarter? And trying to ask questions like, well, where are the hard spots, kind of, and like, or trying to as I was trying to run over my words, so to speak, what 10 years ago or however long ago it was. There was a I want to say there was like sensitive. It was I was very surprised at the the shock that I would ask those type of questions, which I always found very odd.
Well, for a lot of people too. They're very exposing when it
Yeah,
gets people to have to answer and think about stuff they don't necessarily want to
yeah.
address.
And it is working with the right people. So when the measurement framework, when I actually this actually became more of a kind of more framed. This was something that I was doing just on the side when we had a report request. I'm like, I don't know what to build here. And I was working with a few clients. I'm like, they just asked for this, but this is going to, I remember thinking to myself, like, these reports are going to be terrible because there is no scope. So we actually had
Hmm.
these workshops and had these questions. And you do have to have someone, at least when you're springing this on someone who's
Yeah.
at least open to it. But we also talked about too, like if you want to introduce this to your stakeholders or to your department, it's not saying, how come you're not sleeping at night? Like I would not recommend that approach. But the approach that you really want to go to, and that's really important, is that approach is going through like, okay, I know you're looking at X, Y, and Z. Well, where in this would cause concern for you? And especially when you're talking to the leadership,
Mm.
then you'll get some more openness. And then I get to the question like, they're like, well, I don't really know. Then we start again with those extremes. Well, what keeps you up? What would keep you up at night? And they go,
Yeah.
oh, 17 or whatever the rate would be or whatever the number would be. They once you tell them that whatever the pain or pressure, all of a sudden numbers become very clear to somebody.
Exactly. Framing it in a way of the like you said, the how they would think of this in I like to say
Right.
plain English. You know,
Right.
they like outside of like technical terms, like what are the either the aspirations you have for the
Right.
company or the fears that you have,
Right.
and what keeps you up at night or what makes you sleep
Right.
well. and
And
it's knowing X
and
or Y.
sometimes and sometimes it's the framework and the calibration starts at 0. I like to say. So, or I like to say it starts at 0 because
Hmm.
okay, the number 0, we're all getting fired at the end of the day. Okay, what if it was 10? What if it was 20? And then you start going to a point where you can again, rather than a complete shutdown, it becomes what I call the conflict of that decision
Hmm.
making of okay, now I'm not sure, and that's where the calibration of we're at least 90% confident here.
Yep. Now, question for you, I think, to kind of close off some of this for
Yeah,
today. For people, we've talked a lot about like a consultant perspective. So for
yeah,
people from within the organization, um, who need to be their own data champions and
yeah.
self advocate for this, what would you recommend as some good steps for individuals who want to help create this from an internal perspective within their org?
If you want to start building this culture and the framework from a BI team, start with the scope of your forms, and hopefully you're using Jira or something like that for the request. So you at least
Hmm.
have that vetted side where people are. You have to make people think, and I am regardless if you want to roll this out or not. Have some feedback, have some request forms where you're at least asking some of these questions on what metrics they're looking at. That discovery call begins to ask again, like, because there's the 3 types of reports you're going to get: analytical, targeted, observational.
Yep.
If you know that you're getting something without a clear target, this is a great place to start. And you're looking, if someone has an observational report, we just want to be able to check this, like, okay, one thing we've been doing, you always kind of present it in a way where, well, one thing that our BI team's been working on, we really want to provide some context to this. So, and start working on asking those questions on, like, what would be unacceptable to show for this certain number. And that's a good way to ask it. Try to ask some of those questions in your feedback forms or your request forms on what metrics are they looking at and how are they looking at it.
I think those are great takeaways for individuals who are wanting to start this conversation. And I dropped the link, again, to the best
Yeah.
form survey taker. Is just Microsoft Forms. It is free,
Yeah.
and it really is a good way to start collecting data for
Yeah.
sure, and get requests in from that. I use it for my pre and post training surveys constantly. Very helpful for that. But I think just starting those conversations will go a long way to prevent you from creating paperweights, as
Thousand
I like
percent.
expensive paperweights, as I call them. Which is the report that might get looked at, but does anybody actually do anything actionable with it?
Right.
And the actions have to come from conversations on figuring out like what is the data telling us? What do we need to compare this to get to those results? Um, any other kind of final takeaways that you think would be good to pass on to the viewers watching now or anybody on the recording later?
No, honestly, I think if you want some good weekend reading, Doug Hubbard, How to Measure Anything, is a great starting point towards this. Again, it's not geared towards BI analysts, but you could definitely understand how that framework works, and then how measure what matters. I don't remember the author, but it is the OKR framework.
Yeah, I got Douglas Hubbard and the
Yeah,
How to Measure Anything, so I
yeah,
dropped that into the link as well for people. Perfect. And enterprise ERs, I'm like, yeah. So when the muddle through it method isn't considered good, yeah. So
for sure, right.
exactly, having some clear targets and goals is very, very, very important. Then Tommy, I appreciate you coming on today for this. As always, the conversations are fantastic, and it's nice to have more of a water cooler stream for sure, and
Yeah,
to be able to just chit chat about a topic, and hopefully the people tuning in as well got some value out of this, and maybe some key takeaways to go back to your organization and start defining a bit of metrics and framework a little bit more coherently within or outside of your organization. But otherwise, Tommy, have a great rest of your Friday. I'm At some point we'll get you that number 5
I was
Letterman
about to
jacket.
say, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to my 3-letter jacket. So,
exactly. And yeah, James, absolutely. Yeah, it's the smash the like button if you like this. And otherwise, I'll see everyone next week for Gregor Bruner's stream on some updates to the Measure Killer external tool as well. But with that, all of you have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.